Great Scott! Look! There's a rhythmic ceremonial ritual coming up. Damn, where's that kid? Damn! Great Scott!
Grab a coffee with
Look! There's a rhythmic ceremonial ritual coming up. Damn, where's that kid? Damn!
Alice, is everybody ready to find out something about the past, the present, and the future?
Yes!
Yes? I need some energy, everybody. I need some more energy.
Yes!
I need 1.21 gigawatts of energy.
Yes!
Yeah! First Travel Expo 2021! Yeah? I've got something special for you right here. Are you ready? Everyone has a little bag with them. Yes, inside the bag we have more juicy energy. Right! I'm going to hit this button and it's all going to go into the future!
Edit! Darling, there's just not enough energy in the room for seconds. Darling, sweetheart, what are you doing? Come on.
Clara, what is going on?
There's not enough energy. We really need to get everybody to get their flux of pasta biscuits out of their bags and we need you all to take a bite. If you can do that, there's going to be enough energy in the room to get through this. Come on! If you all run away and left your biscuits over there, go and get your biscuits. Darling, take this. Sweetheart, would you mind? We all know that there's always a good woman behind a good man, right? This is how this is going to work today.
It's science, everybody.
Okay, we're going to press this button now. Is there enough energy in the room? Yeah. Are we all fighting? Okay,
No.
we're going to... You know there's not enough energy for you yet?
No. Everybody, is there enough energy today?
Okay, so we're going to press this button and it's going to work. Do we have your attention? Okay, so once upon a time, our story actually begins at the beginning of time. Well, at least at the beginning of time for us as a human species. I don't know where I click. I haven't even practiced. There we go. There we are. So let's have a think about why, as a species, we began to travel at all. Perhaps it was to find new land and to find a home for ourselves. Perhaps it was for war. But ultimately it was to trade. And just to understand how far trading goes back into our human beingness, it's actually how our languages developed globally for the need to trade with each other. And what does trading give us? It gives us an income, and it gives us an ability to look after ourselves, our families, but also to make something better of ourselves as well. So we're going to try a little experiment this morning. For those of you who are up for this, I want you to close your eyes. Nothing nasty is going to happen, I promise. But I want you to have a think about who those first traders would have been. So when I do this, and I've done it a few times to get ready for today, I always end up in some sort of western frontier town. But you could really end up anywhere at all. So perhaps you're on an Elizabethan galleon, perhaps you are trekking through the Himalayas in the Silk Road, perhaps you're going back even further at time, before Rome, before our civilizations that we know of actually started, and perhaps you're one of the first tribes that are roaming the world. It doesn't really matter where you start. The point is, take yourself there, close your eyes, and have a think just for a second what it would have been like. What does it smell like? What does it sound like? Who are you with? What are you wearing? Okay, so I'm going to give you a reality check. The honest truth is that back then, if you were in this time and you were trading, you were probably male, you were probably aged between 18 and 30, and you were definitely travelling light. You may have been travelling by yourself or with family, with others. What was for sure was that the journey that you were about to embark on would have been filled with unknowns, and potential danger. And what we needed when we only had feet or animals or carts or rudimentary rafts was somewhere to stay. So accommodation and somewhere to stay safely is the most important thing again to humans, and we welcome our first purveyors of the travel industry, the accommodation sector. So from those very initial coach-ins to the more glamorous hotels of the 1900s, and again when I do this, I'm the Savoy, right? When that opened, that's how I'm thinking about it. Now, for those of you, everyone's got their eyes open, that's fine. Okay, so open your eyes, because what happens simultaneously around the world, this all happened at the same time. Populations increased, and we wanted to trade and communicate more and more with each other. So we found more and more ingenious ways to do this and to travel. And by the beginning of the 20th century, we had changed our feet for all manner of things, including cars to coaches. We built railroads, we built trains. Our rafts had gone up to boats and to ships. And possibly what I still believe to this day, and the reason I'm in the travel industry at all, the most amazing feat. We managed to conquer the skies. We created airlines, and that's incredible. And each industry boomed. Separately, but boomed nonetheless. And as demand continued and businesses continued to grow, we continued to develop our transport sections. But what happened? I'm in the Industrial Revolution now, so about the 1900s, turn of the century. When people start moving en masse and companies start being created, it does mean that things can happen and things can go wrong. And it's interesting just to note that also at this time was the first time that we started beginning to see trade unions, trade associations, BSI as a standard organisation entered in 1901, and health and safety laws followed shortly afterwards. So this has been with us all the way through. Now, we're going to have to go fast forward because we haven't got that much time today. So we're going to go forward about 1,000 years to about 2000 AD. So technology has rapidly changed and moved the way that we live and we interact with each other. I'm going to tell you a story. So the year is 2000. I am the ripe age of 22 and I am about to embark on the adventure of a lifetime. I am madly in love with my first or second boyfriend, and he's filling my head with all of the most amazing things that we could do if we were travelling through Southeast Asia. I'm pretty sure we went into Trailfinders, we bought a round the world ticket, and then this little printout that we got from the agent is what I gave to my parents, my mother namely, to let her know where we were potentially going to be for the next 6 months. Now just for a second, let's put ourselves in my mother's shoes. Her eldest, her firstborn, is about to tell her that she's about to go off around the world with some guy, and she doesn't know when she's ever going to see me again. So the day arrived, the night before, my mother in good style set me off by having a huge party. I was actually really nervous and decided I didn't want to drink. My mother, on the other half, managed to get herself completely annihilated at the party. I think she was drinking a really nice 90s concoction of Asti Spumante and tequila in pictures. Now I remember at the time being utterly humiliated by this. Now I know this is the action of someone who is terrified. Terrified of letting go, terrified of not letting someone do something, but mostly terrified of never seeing me again. So on to the airplane we go, and the trip begins. We land in Thailand, we see some friends that we've already met out there, and the trip is amazing. And after about a month, we decide that we want to go somewhere a little bit further. We're going to go to Sumatra in Indonesia. Sumatra is a little bit more off the beaten track even now. It certainly was in 2000. So we prepped Mum in advance to just say, look, unlikely to have any internet cafes out there, probably not going to be able to communicate that easily. Please try not to worry, we're back in contact, as soon as we can be. And off we went to what I can only still describe to this day as one of the most amazing countries I've ever been to. It was swinging with orangutans, we were climbing volcanoes, it was just incredible. 10 days or so later, we head back to Thailand. Now, Sumatra's quite a big country. Didn't really hit the press in the UK ever, but lo and behold, whilst we were there was an earthquake. And earthquake so big that it hit the news in the UK. In the south of the island as it happened, and we were right in the north. But of course Mother didn't know that, did she? Well, the stream of emails that we came back to when I got back to Thailand, she was absolutely horrified and completely worried, but had no way of doing anything about it, just had no way of really contacting us. And we didn't know this situation had happened. But actually what happened next was the bit that was more terrifying than anything else that had happened. And actually it's the place that she thought I was going to be safe. So we were back in Thailand and we were on an island called Koh Tao. 21 years ago, it was pretty desolate, and the way that you would spend your days were diving, and then in the evening you would go off to find a restaurant. So we decided to go a bit more off the beaten track. No one really around, and suddenly out of nowhere, this man came out of this restaurant shouting and carrying an Uzi. I don't know if anyone's ever had that happen to them before, but having a gun pulled on you is absolutely terrifying. We both stood absolutely still, didn't know what was going to happen, and this guy was basically shouting at us and accusing us of saying something to him and telling us to get out of his restaurant. And the situation escalated over about 2 minutes, to the point that we were on the ground, and then somebody else came out of the restaurant, I assumed to defuse the situation, but he was carrying a machete, so also even more terrifying. We just backed off. The whole situation, probably about 5 minutes, and fortunately, at that point, someone came out of another building and it stopped, and they just all scurried back in. I cannot tell you how you realise how utterly helpless you are. I wasn't on my own, but both of us were in a situation that was completely out of our control, and the worry that my mother would have had about not knowing what had possibly happened to me in that situation could have completely come true. Okay, so thank you. So what was happening within our industry at this time? It's fair to say that the internet was the next huge boom for the travel industry. And at this point we welcome a completely different set of players into our industry. So the low-cost carriers, our hotel bed banks, our online travel agencies, and of course the huge technology providers that are behind them. And travel really did become affordable for everybody at this point. And what that meant was that your travellers that are going on holidays wanted to bring some of that content into their corporate lives. And leisure technology transformed, and unfortunately, corporate travel management company technology didn't. And it was at that point that we first began to see what we started to call leakage from program, and people actually wanted to book outside of what they were asked to do. And unfortunately, the companies themselves allowing this to happen because the pricing was actually so different, you couldn't really argue that anymore. So at this point, and I'm brave to say this is a TMC, but I do believe it was at this point that the value proposition of a travel management company was called into question for the first time. So, whilst all that was going on, let's just have a think about who are the sort of people that are travelling at this point. So, we are, from the 60s onwards, we've developed countercultures. Human beings are behaving and expressing themselves in ways that perhaps they've not done so before. We see minority groups, we see the LGBTQI movements coming up all the way through from the 60s and up, and even now to this day we're still talking about diversity and inclusion and really trying to make these things happen and to make real change. But at that point in time, remember it's circa 2000, this is not the time to talk to your business about not having your needs met. Businesses are still very much stuck in the mentality of the 1950s, where you're very lucky to have a job, and whatever you do in your social life, you keep that over there. Do not bring it into the office and do not embarrass us in any way. So, as an employee, if you had different requirements, there wasn't really anywhere for you to talk about that and for those needs to be met. And of course, as an industry, as a society, we continued to react to disaster. In 1977, the Tenerife airport bombing meant that the way that we talked on radio controls, this was standardised forever globally, so we changed because of that. And it's still the worst air traffic control accident to this day. In 1989, the Hillsborough disaster changed the way that event management works forever, as far as the way you move people in larger events and how you look after that. And just a week ago, we were all remembering the 20th anniversary of September the 11th, which I don't need to tell any of you in this room changed the way that air travel and security work forever. Okay, fast forward again. Where are we right now? Let's just take ourselves back to pre-pandemic. Doc Brown got quite a few things right, sir. Automation, tick. Video conferencing, video calls, but with video conferencing, we're not far off. Even Nike got self-tying shoelaces out. We're a little bit short, they did, I know, right? Not quite the same as in the film, but they did. I did a bit of research for this. The thing that they haven't done yet is hoverboards, quite to how we would like them to be, but you know, we wait in hope for that time to come. And probably the thing that actually Doc Brown missed over everything was the internet. So we've rapidly become the most connected we've ever been as far as technology is concerned, but 40 years on, we're now raising questions about the disconnectivity that brings. It's not the fault of the internet, it's the human beings that have used the internet for this time. We are living in a world now where in some parts of the world, suicide kills more than heart disease. Mental health is something that we're living with and we're beginning to understand. And as misinformation and the use of misinformation continues to flow throughout the internet, we're actually shaking the very foundations that we built our society on, because there is no trust anymore and people don't know where to turn. We're living, unfortunately, in a world that we live with terrorism and the risk of that every day. And coming out of this pandemic, we also live in a world with the risk of disease and illness as well. And we're learning to cope with all of these things. We're having really good conversations with each other, because as a species, we actually want alignment. We want to be fair. We're having conversations about diversity and inclusion. We're talking about female salaries matching male salaries. We want fairness, and we really do. The employers that we work for want to do it too, but nobody quite knows the next step. And honestly, I believe, right up until the beginning of 2020, the world was just moving too fast for us to actually sit back and actually have some sensible conversations about how we do what we know, what we need to do, and how we move forward. But then the unthinkable happened, didn't it? As I sit here with my travel professionals who I love, the last 18 months have been the most horrendous I think any of us have ever been through. We didn't think it was ever going to stop. But whilst that was happening, the entire world was resetting. And those conversations that we've had about sustainability, about duty of care, about travel risk, and about traveller well-being, we've actually had time to think about this, and we want something different now. And those conversations are quite difficult to have. They were difficult to have before, and they're certainly more difficult to have now, because in order for us to really become the companies that we want to become, and look after our staff in the way that we say that we want to, lovely marketing slogans of our people are our whatever it happens to be. We've really got to believe that now, and I do believe that people want to, and I do believe there's a way. So, these difficult questions have always been there. There's never been a good time to ask them, and I think one of the issues is that people don't want to provide personal information to their employees. It was literally 5 or 10 years ago, and in some companies it's still happening to this day, that you were discriminated against for being different. People don't want to put themselves out there in the fear of repercussion. And what we really need to do is build trust. So, I'm very pleased to say that today we're going to, there we are, and we have got you right up there, Jim, it's okay. So today, I put a panel together, and I'm going to introduce them in a second. We've got travel managers, we've got travellers and company owners, and we've got 2 gentlemen from the risk sector. Because it is my firm belief that travel risk management, if taken to how it should be taken, is the answer to some of these questions. If you want to look after your staff, you're going to have some difficult questions to ask them. They don't want to give you the answers, but if you're telling them it's because you are protecting them and they're safe and it's the only way, then there is a way forward. This is not easy. So what we've done I've got, if I can see all the tickets. Okay, so we need your involvement. We're going to do, I said I wouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it. We're going to do something that's similar to Cards Against Humanity, but it's going to be slightly cleaner. Blankety blank for those of you that aren't sure about Cards Against Humanity. Don't worry guys, I did say I wasn't going to say that. Okay, so I would like to introduce, starting at the end, Jim Lawrence or James Lawrence, Jim from Peregrine, as one of our risk experts. The lovely Carol Fergus for the second panel that she's done here, so thank you so much. We already know who you are from Fidelity, thank you so much. We've got Alex Twiggs, and I'm always going to get this wrong, so I'm going to stumble. So World Travel Protection, sorry Alex, thank God, they're all up here behind me. And the amazing Addie Stone, who very kindly stepped in, as he's a director and owner of Emirates and Son, and he very kindly stepped in at the last minute. It's actually really difficult to put a panel together at the moment when there's COVID looming and various other things and people aren't 100% sure about travelling, so I am so eternally grateful to you, sir. Thank you so much. So, see? A little bit similar to Cards Against Humanity. On your chairs, you'll have tickets. And on those tickets are things to fill in the blank. These are all things that can happen pre-trip, during trip, post-trip, and the things that if we can talk about them, we can perhaps learn and share how we can get past some of this stuff, because it's actually, well, me and Carol were talking quite a lot, weren't we, before this, and you know that you've got a lot of these things already covered, and even you were like, there's stuff that I just don't know if we've covered yet. So the point is, this is new. Travel and risk management coming together is a very new thing. Travel is like completely the opposite of risk, but as business we need to bring the two things together. And I think by listening to the advice that the risk guys can give us, will actually help us learn how we can move some stuff on and put resilience back into our industry. So we've got blue questions first, there's blue answers. You've written it down for me and I've already forgotten. I've got red answers, I think, and green answers. That was always going to go wrong, wasn't it? So we're going to start with a blue. If somebody had... Yes? Anybody? Yes, there.
Can the panel please advise how they might approach travelling with disabilities in their programme?
So, is this something from a travel manager's perspective that you've got in your programme now? Is it something you're already considering? Is it something you kind of know of, but actually we're not quite there yet or we don't have the requirements? I'm going to open with you, Carol, and then hopefully the other guys are going to come and support you with some advice.
So to be honest, I've not actually had to deal with that in terms of someone approaching and saying that we have a disability and we need support. But I'm not saying that that's not happened. So from my perspective, if I was approached and said, you know, I have a disability, I'll need support in terms of my travel and this is where I'm going, I would first get an understanding of, you know, what support they need, how we can support them, and then work with my TMCs to make sure that that individual is looked after in terms of their booking, getting to the airport, the airlines. The other thing is it would trigger for me, is it covered in the relationships that I have with my suppliers? So someone has come to me, they've outlined what they want, what the disabilities are, what the requirements are, and what can we do to help and support them in their travel journey, both making the booking whilst travelling and then also the return journey and how they're made to feel in terms of being inclusive, their requirements are taken care of. And part of my role would be to ask the questions of my suppliers. So, you know, the airlines, the TMCs is my gatekeepers. So what are you asking? How are you supporting? Are you making sure that this person, you know, we've dot the I's and cross the T's? Because I always say every traveller for us is a project. And it's about personalisation and what it is for that individual and what it means for them. So it's asking those questions. The other thing is when we make a booking, we are very heavily connected to our security risk traveller tracker, etc. And I would also be asking their advice and saying, you know, that this is the situation and am I covering everything that I need to cover? Am I asking the right questions? And am I ensuring that this person is tracked almost right the way through their journey so that they're being looked after? So it's the whole supply chain from starting with the journey, so pre, whilst travelling and post, so that they feel they're looked after, they feel safe, risk-free, they know who to go to, and that we've had the relationships and the discussions with the required suppliers to support them and take that further for other people. And then also post-travel, we would want them to give us some feedback in terms of how well have we done, how well has the suppliers done, so that we can share not only with our supply chain, but for other travellers, so that they get a clear understanding of how we can support them. Because there will be some travellers out there that won't even tell us because they'll feel uncomfortable about having a conversation. They may feel that, you know, they don't want to share such personal information. And I think by communicating and marketing the sort of support that we can provide, hopefully that will open people up and make them feel more comfortable about bringing things forward so that we can make it even better. That's my thoughts.
That's great thoughts, Carol. Thank you. Alex, have we got some tips on how people would approach this from the pre-travel perspective? Obviously, Carol's rightly said this has got to follow all the way through. But are there things that we can be doing before travellers even thought about? How do we approach this?
Sure. I'd like to pick on a point you made about making people feel comfortable. I mean, not every disability is visible, so you might have travellers who you don't realise have a disability. And have you created an atmosphere where they feel comfortable coming forwards, either to you or to your risk management provider to get some advice? So in terms of what you can do before you travel, it's about at least understanding that location. Someone might be travelling to London, think it's a very accessible city, and they expect to go onto the tube, and then they realise that actually, if you're in a wheelchair, you're quite limited in where you can get on and off the tube. And it's really about getting into that detail of where you're travelling to, what you can and can't do, and how your disability will impact that, and how they can have a productive trip, and what the organisation can do to support that. So working with those different providers, either ground transport or hotel or what have you.
There was something on TV, wasn't there? I don't know if you guys saw it fairly recently, where there were people travelling with wheelchairs, and their wheelchairs were getting broken by the aircraft, and they're like, this is my body that you've literally just taken away from me. So it's really got to just be taken much more seriously and really understood how that really helps, how that really affects people. Okay, I'm going to go to another blue one. So if anybody else has got a blue answer, my lovely Lee. Oh no, sorry, I stand corrected, my lovely Julia. Fight over it, girls, fight over it.
Can please advise on how they might approach honour killings in their travel programme?
Sorry guys, this is a big one, and the reason this is a big one is because we don't think about this in this country, but you're talking about global travel programmes with people travelling from different countries to start off with. We have to get out of our bias. We have to. And we have to understand what it's like for living in other countries. So I'm going to go to you, Jim, because I knew this was going to be a hard one. Because I doubt anyone's got this in their policies right now. So how do we, let's talk a bit about it and how it can...
Yeah, so it all comes back to the risk assessment process. So identifying the threats that you're going to be faced when you actually do travel overseas. It's very, very important that that process is really fluid. And that goes back to adversary identification. So when you look at a destination, we're not just looking at the wider risks, we're looking at actually what could impact that piece of travel. Whether that's honour killings, whether that's kidnap, whether that's terror, whatever that looks like, they need to be identified. If you don't identify those main threats, you can't actually treat it effectively. And by doing that, the risk exposure obviously increases when you travel, and you're going to be putting yourself in more danger than it is actually necessary. But what is really important when we look at that risk assessment process and identifying these key elements is you must have a risk appetite as an organisation. If you don't have a risk appetite and benchmark where your tolerance level sits, you can't assess it against the risks you're going to face. So to understand that more deeply, that needs to be driven by corporate engagement, stakeholders. They need to take ownership of how much risk that organisation is willing to take. Once you understand where that sits, you can then adopt the risk assessment process effectively and benchmark it against those threats that you've identified. And then, if it sits within tolerance, you can either accept or decline that risk, or you can transfer that risk or adopt mitigation in order to reduce that risk exposure. That way you can make a more informed decision about whether you're going to travel. If there is things such as honour killings that have been identified during this process, then you layer in mitigation and advice and guidance and empowerment to the traveller in order to avoid these circumstances from occurring. And that may be through, intelligence briefings, local intelligence on the ground, advising them to avoid certain areas where they're travelling to, where there is a heightened risk of these types of threats occurring. All right, so it's all about empowerment of the traveller, but also it needs to come from the top down, and that way you can really layer in your risk treatment to minimise the risk exposure when you're travelling.
Hang like an absolute pro. Thank you so much.
Say that much.
So we're going to move on to the next colour, Lizzie. Orange, thank you. So now we're thinking mid-trip. And before we do this, Annie, we had a really good chat just coming on to this. And you travel, right? A lot. You're also director of your company. And although you've expressed to me some of the situations you found yourself in, but also now you're considering what that means to your staff, who are from different generations. So do you want to just tell the panel one of the stories that you told me today, just something that happened even when you were travelling? Thank you.
Just following on from James, the point about the sort of empowering the traveller and the local knowledge, that is imperative. No matter how much risk mitigation you do, no matter how much liability cover you have, once you're on that trip, you have to accept that you follow the locals and take their advice. If you think we're going to, which we are very good at, is dropping into countries and do you have fish and chips because I'm from England, you must speak English, and if you don't speak English then there's something wrong with you. It's that kind of thing we have to accept. And what Bex, from the many stories we've shared, is referring to, once I went, many a time, but on one trip to Nigeria, I remember traveling between states, and you have to leave one state to get to the other by a certain time. If dusk falls, you don't leave. You just put it off until the following morning. But we had some important meetings in the other states. So we left quite late, and during the trip we broke down. This was about 10:30, 11 at night. The power steering went. The chap who was with us, an Israeli friend, really good with his hands, he sort of disabled the power steering and were able to continue on our journey. But initially we were thinking of staying overnight. And my brother, who was with me at the time, made some calls and said, look, where would you advise us to stay in this area? And they said, don't stay in that area. That area is known for cannibalism. So if you stay in the hotel, you may not be waking up in the morning to what you think, if waking up at all. And with my Western head on, I just couldn't believe this. I could go to sleep and someone might try and kill me and eat me. That just doesn't work. But it was a reality. So it's that thing about local information. I had no knowledge, and I've been to Nigeria so many times. So if someone had said to me, or if I'd taken time out to do some research, been empowered with information, I would have known. I would not have taken that trip at that time of night. So these are the kind of experiences that will happen. And it was, when I was speaking to James earlier today, I just met this morning, I really just stood there flabbergasted to realise how much risk I've taken and how much exposure I've exposed my staff to. We will change our ways. That's what I'm saying.
Can I just add to that as well? What people perceive as low probability, high risk, and so on and so forth. The biggest thing that people come across when they travel is exactly what Asia's spoken about there, is lack of cultural awareness, lack of understanding around local laws, and obviously the usual one of early local medical issues. But it's that empowerment of understanding what cultural situation you're going to be in, the local environment. That way you're going to minimise your exposure immediately. But the amount of people and the amount of travellers that travel without even doing the slightest bit of research on the destination they're going to, because they just presume and their perception is it's going to be okay, it won't happen to me, is the wrong attitude. So really understand the environment, empower the traveller with local customs, local information, local cultural issues, how to act, local laws, and then that way you're minimising their risk exposure before they even put their foot on the ground. And all that takes is a piece of advisory for them to read before they go. And that way you're meeting the duty of care to ensure that they're empowered, that they feel confident enough to travel as well. And especially in this climate, coming, out of the pandemic where everybody's a bit dubious about travelling, you're trying to get the confidence of your travelling workforce back up to a certain level. Well, do that by giving the confidence you actually care about them, and you're going to give them the information and the tools and all the other bits of information to make them act and behave in a certain way. But yeah, it's a really good point.
Thank you. So, guys, just going back to the questions, anybody got an orange question that they just want to fill the blank in so we can the more awkward the better, right? The panel are loving this. So there we go.
Racially motivated hate crime.
There it is.
You'll put it back to me, I can see it.
What I'm curious to know, and again, Carol, I will give it to you guys because you guys are going to know how to handle this, but I'm just curious to know, is this even something that's come up in your policies at all? Is it something that is being thought about? The same for you, Addy. Is this something that you guys have actually considered and have trained people on how to do? This is not to name and shame. This is my favourite one because it's something that I never thought about, and I have to step completely out of my bias to put myself in that position. So.
No, it's not, in terms of we've not talked about racially motivated hate crime. However, what we do say is to be a thoughtful traveller and be considered and be aware of what you're doing. And one of the things that's said about, recognising and understanding local requirements, culture, attitude, legal requirements. And what we find with our travellers, and it's really bizarre, they will go on a trip and then they'll go, I'm doing extended stay. Or they will go on a trip and it includes a weekend because they're there for longer, and they forget that they're still there for business. It comes to the weekend and they turn into something that you just don't recognise. They go to all the worst places, they experiment, they almost get arrested, and then on Monday they call security expecting them to sort it all out. So I think it's really important that we say to people that, even though you may extend or you're staying longer, you are still there for business, and you need to be, very thoughtful and mindful of what you're doing. I think in terms of your question, what we have is our 10 steps back to travel, and one of the steps we've talked about is about D&I, and we say be a thoughtful traveller, and we've linked them to our security and risk company, a risk management company. And what we've asked them to do is we've put a link together, and we say they go into the country. So as well as getting information from global security to say you're going to this country, these are the things that you need to consider. We also have a hub now connected to our risk management company, and it says put the country in that you're visiting, and they will provide you with up-to-date information about the laws, what you can, what you can't do. And I guess that's kind of our way of getting people to really think about where they're travelling and some of the things that they need to consider. But it's not something that we've written specifically in our policy, and we're not calling it that.
Yeah, no, of course. Alex, I know that you're keen to answer anyway, so go.
One of the points I'd just like to raise is around training. Can you train and give people advice before they go to minimise the impact of situations where that could arise? So it's about empowering travellers not to go down the route of victim blaming, but there are actions that we can take to minimise the impact. And then if something does happen and it could potentially impact their trip in terms of their mental health, what support you have in place so that they can call on people to just reset, talk through any experience they've had, so that they can get the most out of the trip, and so you're giving them the confidence that they can do that, delay meetings if it's been a difficult experience. How are you dealing with that as an organisation to give them the confidence to choose the best path for them while they're abroad?
Anything you would like to add?
Yeah, just we've come across this quite a few times with universities. Obviously, very diverse culture within the university. Most of these problems have arisen in Eastern Europe. So what we've done is we've approached this in a different way, in that before people go, we've adjusted the way that we pass over the information, and we target the information that we're passing on to the traveller. So it's very important that they're very aware that there is this threat or potential cultural or diversity issue when you're travelling. So what we do is we make sure that up front they're fully aware of those threats, and allow them to make the decision about whether they actually want to put themselves in that environment themselves. So without that information at the front, you're actually putting that traveller in a situation that they're uncomfortable with and may not be able to deal with. So what we look at is ways of empowering them and allowing them to be part of the decision process as whether they're comfortable to actually travel to that location, because there's nothing worse than being forced to go to a destination where you could be exposed, you're going to feel very anxious. So again, as I spoke about there, your mental health and well-being is going to be affected considerably. All right, so it's all about this pre-planning, pre-preparation piece that will minimise exposure downstream. Involve the traveller, but also the organisation has the overall arch, the overarching umbrella for the travel safety programme, but it must include the traveller's opinion and their perception and willingness to travel. Because without their confidence, they are going to behave, and other issues are going to ensue post-trip and in fact during the trip.
Thank you. And then just to add, I think something that actually can happen when you're travelling, and Ali, I'm going to ask you to pick this one out. I haven't asked you this previously, so I'm going to pick on your toes. Racial profiling is an issue when people are going through airport security and things like that. Has something like that ever happened? And how do you guys deal with that? Ali?
I really can only speak from a personal point of view during my travel experiences, but I remember once going through an airport in America. I think it was not Miami, something like Los Angeles or something, and you got the TSA, and they pulled me out of the queue and sort of said, no, you can go down there. Now, immediately I thought, why are they picking me up? And it turned out, because I'd entered America so many times, that I wasn't a threat and I was able to go through. But the people alongside me were sitting down there, were standing, waiting to go through passport control or customs. And I could hear them saying, look, you see, they're profiling him. They're picking him out because, I know it's because he's a black male, he's of a certain age category. And I'm thinking, where's all this coming from? Are they profiling me? And then I started to look at it a bit closer as I travelled more. From that moment, sort of, I really opened my eyes, and in reality, some of the experiences I've had in racial profiling should have made me more aware. But as one matures and you're trying to bring about a more inclusive society, try not to sort of jump on that bandwagon. But without a shadow of a doubt, that does occur, and it's something you have to be prepared for. It's something, because we specialise in Africa as a company, well, my region is Africa, I'm always talking to my staff and making them aware of the fact of, you may be stereotyped or profiled, not because you're black, not necessarily because you're a woman, not necessarily because you have pink hair, there is just this thing that happens. And depending on the culture and society you're finding yourself arriving in, it's totally different from where you left. And you've got to be adaptable to start and accept that this happens. As much as you may say it's wrong, it does happen, and we've got to live with it, and hopefully it won't be forever. But each culture will approach you differently. A very simple example, by birth I'm a Muslim. When I arrive in Egypt, my name is no longer Ali, it's Ibrahim. That gives me a totally different reception than if I say Ali. A business partner of mine whose name is Paul, when we went scuba diving in Egypt, when we got there, he just saw the different approach that people had to me when I mentioned my name was Ibrahim. He decided he's no longer going to bear the name Paul. He just said my name's Akeem. And this is a true story. This is a true story. And the reception you get, the moment you say a Muslim name, my brother from another mother, you are totally treated differently. So these are the things we have to be aware of. They exist. We can either work with them or we can work against them.
Thank you, Eddie. Is there anything you want to add, Carol?
Yeah, I was going to say, I've got two stories. One's quite funny and the other one is relatively serious. But I was sitting in the lounge, just minding my own business, and then I got on the tunnel, I will, Carol Neal, please come to the desk. And as I sat there on my own, I kept thinking, oh my God, I've got no drugs. I know I packed lots of shoes, but they're not going to arrest me for that. And I sat there and I thought, okay, I'll go to the desk. But as I stood up, everyone was looking at me. And it was because they were upgrading me. But at the time, I felt like, oh my God, what the hell have I done? And everyone that watched me walk that Green Mile was looking at me thinking, what's she done? Why have they called her to the desk? And and the same thing with you. I felt really guilty. I hadn't done anything wrong, but you could see the people around me all looking at me thinking, this woman, what's she done? Why have they called her to the desk? And then the other time when I first started travelling, and obviously I wasn't a novice at it, I mean, my first trip with British Airways, I was frightened to touch the thing on the chair because I thought I had to pay for it, and I thought, well, I've bought that, and I didn't, and someone nicked it, and in the end I found it was for free, and I lost out. But, but if you don't know, you don't know. But I remember going to the fast track to go through. I was in business class, and the air stewardess stopped me and said, I think you're in the wrong queue. And I had to show her my ticket. So that actually happened to me.
We have shame airline stewards across the world though, It's changing. We're so shocked when we hear stories like this. It goes to our very core. We're other human beings. How can this be happening? The point is, it is. That's what I want to take away from this today. We cannot any longer bury our heads in the sand and pretend that all of these conversations aren't happening to the very people that we say that we look after and that we want even more. Have we got time? I don't know what the time is. We're just sitting here talking away. 10 to, thank you. So we can do another question, or we can kind of wrap up and go on to the next thing. We've got about 10 minutes, so it depends how, would anybody else, anything they would like to add? So we've got our final colour, green. Is anybody want, so this is the post-trip, so this is just something to think about, just to, well, we've got all these great experts up here. Anybody? Oh, hello.
Can we please advise how they might approach stress caused by travel in their travel program?
Love that. Okay, I'm going to look at you, Carol, because I know you're doing quite a lot of work with well-being and that side of stuff. When I think about this, and when I talk about this, it's not just necessarily the stress of what you're going to go and do when you're there. That's stressful enough. Like, I can talk to anyone for about 15 minutes today. It's the fears that you might have. It's the, what if you don't like flying? And that's a real issue around that. So how do we understand and how do we protect that? Is it something that you guys are starting to do yet, or?
So I'm one of the mental health champions for Fidelity, and there are a number of champions, and it's shown on our profile so people know who they can go and talk to. I did it when we started, when we initially went into lockdown, and it wasn't really so much for the travellers because no one was travelling, but it was more about being able to identify mental health, stress, anxiety on Zoom, and know what to look for and how you can support your colleagues and the people that you work with. So that's the reason why I did it. But I think I'm really glad I did, because I felt that, I learnt a lot, not just about other people, but about myself as well. But in the travel world as well, it's enabling you to identify and be empathetic and know that people can come and talk to you if they have those concerns. One of the things that I keep harping on our 10 steps, that I am proud of it, is that we have a block that talks about mental health. And part of the discussion and the topics and the questions you ask yourself is, do I want to go back to travel? Do I have any anxieties, any stress, etc.? And we give them people that they can go to. So the mental health champions, there's links to companies that we're associated with, or they can go to their HR representative or their line manager. So we give like a tick box of things that they can do. The only thing that we haven't covered is, and I feel that it's something that's going to become very prevalent once people start travelling again, is if someone takes that journey and then they get very anxious. So they get to the airport and they suddenly think, oh my God, there's too many people here, or they get on the plane, or they get to the hotel and they suddenly feel isolated. And I think, again, that's discussions that we need to have with our risk management companies in terms of how they can support and having links and connections of people that they can contact, as well as the airlines and the hotels being trained, being mindful, and being prepared to support ground transportation, etc.
Alex, you're both so keen. I love it.
Absolutely. So I would like just to follow on from what you've just said. So if something does happen when you're overseas, there's a lot of things that go wrong, and what people get wrong with regards to their travel safety program is the follow-up. So if there is an incident, most travellers will call their insurer straight away. The conduit between the insurer and your organisation, 9 times out of 10, is broken. And what that means is your traveller experiences an incident, they're very stressed, they may have anxiety, they may be, have mental health issues, they come back and they're lost within the system because the conduit between the insurance and your organisation is not in place. So you can't put a welfare or well-being programme in place to support them when they get back, because let's face it, it doesn't stop. The stress just isn't when you travel, it comes with you back. You carry that baggage with you back to the UK. So what's really important is having that team in place, having somewhere for people to go, to access resources to help them through that recovery process. And that last pillar of the travel process is really crucial. If you don't get that right, then your workforce is going to feel undervalued, you don't care for them, but mainly you need to make sure that reporting process between the insurance company and your organisation is in place. If you don't know, you can't help. The amount of organisations I've looked at where that linkage has been broken. So there are people that have experienced some pretty horrific incidents, whether that's sexual assault, whether that's they've been involved in the middle of a piece of unrest or a terror attack, and nobody has looked after them when they return. And what that does, they don't want to travel anymore. They're carrying this weight around on their shoulders without any support. And you have a duty of care to look after them, not just before they go, but when they come back as well. So make sure that forms part of your travel safety programme, because it's a vital pillar.
And my point is going to be around when we get back to travelling in greater volumes. One of the recurring things that the conversations I've had has been more impactful trips, longer trips with more meetings, not just because that reduces cost, but also helps with sustainability if you're only doing one flight instead of splitting it over 3 trips. And that's going to have an impact on the stresses people feel. Not just a single event, but just being away from your family for a week, 2 weeks. How is that impacting people? What support do they have in place? And recognising that and helping people to manage that with whatever support mechanisms you want to put in place, whether that's your EAP, risk management providers, whoever, or just being able to call and talk to someone through those issues. So when we get back to travelling, it's not going to be the same. We all recognise that, and it's going to change some of the risks that we're facing. Stress is going to be a huge part of that, I think.
Thank you. And Addy, I'm just going to close the panel with you. If you've got any thoughts, obviously this was a bit news for you today. You literally stepped in about 24 hours ago for me, so I had to give them a quick rundown on travel risk management. What are your takeaways from today, from what you've learned? Because perhaps this is going to help other people too.
The biggest point for me is realising how naive I've been as an employer. I hold my hands, and listening to you guys, I'm going to be going back to the office on Friday because we've got a meeting, and it will be a case of, first and foremost, I'll apologise to my staff. I can hear laughter, but it's actually so serious. I've exposed people to danger, not dealt with their well-being, their mental. See, those things don't come into it. You do the trip, you do the deal, you bring back the money, you get your share, company has theirs, that's a great bit of business. What I've learned from this talking to Bex over the last day, my fellow esteemed panelists here today, is that we as employers have to take a much greater responsibility. Now, for us to do that, if Becky hadn't called me, I wouldn't have known about this risk. The whole concept of risk management in travel. So somewhere along the way, and I'm not saying it's any book, I'm not saying whose responsibility it is, but the message needs to be said loud and clear to employers. How you're going to get that across? For you as a business, it's worthwhile, because obviously the more clients, the better the business. If staff are travelling and they're travelling in all sense of terms, they're travelling well, then that is worthwhile doing. The reality is we as employers, we get somebody to book the flights, we get someone to book the hotels, and we get someone to meet them at the airport and bring them back and be with them when they're travelling around. Somehow, the message needs to be got to us employers more. Because hearing it today, I'm sure if I sat around with my business network and said, this is what I've learned today, they'd be amazed. So whatever you're doing, increase it, make us more aware, because we cannot take our staff for granted. And it can't be when there's a great accident or somebody ends up in Maudsley Hospital and you say, well, maybe I should have, could have, would have, but now I will start doing it from now. Please get the message out to us somehow. And if they're like me, you value your staff and your business, we will listen. We may not like the bill, but we will listen.
I'll
be good puzzle.
There's a reason I wanted him on the stage today, right? So look, what I really wanted to try and achieve out of today is to say that none of this is anyone's fault. I've taken you all on a journey from the beginning of business travel, the beginning of why we travel, why this sector and why we're all so different and we've all grown in different ways. But the point is, and I really believe for the first time in history, we can come together as a united travel industry. We can agree that the duty of care for the employees and for the people that we are looking for is the thing that we have in common, and we can start making the changes we need in order to make our industry more resilient for the future. And for the first time in history, to be proactive rather than reactive, which is actually what everybody needs. So, there is a reason that we've done it like this today. If I'd have come out and said, there's a new ISO coming out on travel risk management, 31030, nobody would have come. And in fact, I tested this yesterday to do a huddle just to see if anybody would come, and then I did. So we've got to make this about something interesting. Like, this happens and it affects us every single day, yet we all just kind of go, no, we don't know how to deal with it. I'm telling you, I found out about this standard about 12 months. I saw it 12 months ago, I found out about it 24 months ago. It's the backbone that we need to prove what we do. So I'm asking you today to get behind it. It's available this month. There are proper official announcements about it coming around about the 4th of November. But there's also something else that's been recognised. So the standard is one thing, and for those of you that don't know, the Travel Risk Management Standard is aimed at corporates. It is not a certifiable standard at this stage, although that is the plan, and that is where it will go to eventually, but these things can take about 4 to 5 years to happen. And the more companies that start using it and using it as a benchmark, the quicker that will be. But there's also a massive recognition that we're working with an industry that has no standards. I mean that in the nicest possible way. We have good standards of care, and we do all look after everyone in the best that we can. But the hotel star rating system doesn't mean anything. That's not a global, it's not a global standard. Most standards that we work with in the travel industry are to do with marketing. They're to do to sell us in a different way. So there is a piece of work happening. Some people know about this because I've been starting to talk to them about it. There is a piece of work happening that is going to change that. I've been tasked, maybe because of my passion in this area, I'm not sure, to put some working groups together to have some conversations about this. So that when the corporates start asking, how are you going to prove that you do all these things, the supplier network have actually got something that they can actually work with an accreditation and say, this is how. Okay, thank you so much. I cannot tell you what it took to get up here today and do this, but I'm absolutely delighted. My panel, thank you so very much for joining us. This is a really difficult subject, but I hope we've done it with some care, and I hope you can think about things in a different way. We have got a competition going, so I am going to mention this. There's questions going out on social media every single day this week. First one yesterday, second one today, and then up until Friday. And there's an opportunity to win an anytime voucher that should allow a family of 4 to go and see Back to the Future the musical. So I didn't time it, but that was all coming out at the same time, but that was pretty good. If you want to hear about anything else that we talked about, if you are interested in joining the working groups that we're putting together, please come and talk to us. We have a scan on our stand, we have a scan here, we have those scans on the cookies, right? It actually works as well. So have a look, register, tell us where you're at. We're not going to hound you. For any of you that knows me, that's really not my style. If you want to come and do this, if you want to come and be part of a movement that could change the way the industry works and connects with each other, then come and join us. And I thank you very much.
By way of unity, I wore a pink tie. Okay, take that one for the picture. Okay. Fantastic. Thank you to the panel. Thank you, Demex. You know what? Some real issues. Let's not hide from them. Let's get them out in the open. Some real issues. You've been brave enough to raise them, and you've been brave enough to give some really sensible advice. Fantastic panel. Bex, you're a star. Bex Devon, thank you.